Hello there. So I thought today we could try talking about variables. Now, variables themselves is quite a dry concept, but they are incredibly important in programming. They run the very framework for everything to work. So in JavaScript we have three types of variables. We have let, we have const, and then we have var. So this is quite old. We don't really use it now, but that's legacy JavaScript. And these are the main ones that we're going to be using. So let is just the basic variable that allows you to change values, so you can actually change the value that you have under this. Const doesn't allow you to change anything, so no change. And let's actually show that in action, shall we? So let's jump into our editor. Alright, cool. So let's say we have a variable here like size. Let's say we want to have a circle that changes as we move around. So we'll say let size equals 10. Also, another thing to bear in mind is the way you actually have variables set up. So first thing first, you want to define your variable. So that's this first section here. So you're defining a variable called size. The next thing you want to do is initialize it. So initialize. We'll just say init because it's quicker. So because this function setup runs first, we can say size is equal to 100, and then let's say in our draw function we can put in a circle. So we'll say circle, we'll define that about 100, and then we can define that with the variable size. And there we are, we've got a white circle. So that variable is defined outside of this function and this function, which allows us to access it. So it's what we say a global variable. Now, variables tend to be encapsulated in the function that they are defined in. So it's something linked with scope. So think of it as size having scope across this whole thing here. Now let's say we were to get rid of this and we put let size here. You see that we get an error because size is defined only in our setup function and not defined in the draw function. So that gives us an error here. Now on the other hand, you can use something called const. So if we have something like const size and we get rid of this here, this will also give us an error because you can't redefine size again, even though it's the same value. Let's change that up. You can't have that, it doesn't work. Const is a fixed value and cannot be changed. Generally speaking, also, when you define const values, you tend to stick with uppercasing values, so it tends to do that. So what would happen is you would change all those, all the occurrences of that variable being defined. Just so you know. So const. Now we're going to stick with let. Actually, no. Let's talk a little bit about var. So if you were to use var, that works too. I mean, we're defining it by 1,000. Let's do 100. Yeah, that works fine. One strange behavior of var is that you don't necessarily have to follow this order. That's why people tend not to use it, because it has quite unstable behavior. So you could say something like this. You could say var size is equal to 100, and then you could say size here is equal to 100, and you can do that. So let's get rid of that for a minute. You can do that, and that should still work with var. But if you were to change this to let, it throws an error because you have to define your variable first and then initialize it. But var lets you do it beforehand. So that's why people tend not to stick with var. They tend to stick with let and const. Now, general naming conventions that we use for variables tends to be something along the lines where it describes the object that you're setting. So, for example, we are setting size, so it makes sense to set size. If we're setting our x coordinate or y coordinate, maybe something like pos x, and you tend to follow this naming convention of camel casing. It's where So let's say we want to define the number of legs on a cat. We could say cat legs, and we tend to follow this naming convention. So it's lowercase for the first word, uppercase first letter of the second word, and then everything beyond that would be uppercase for the first letter of that word. So let's say, for example, we were defining the number of cat legs on the third cat, or let's say second cat. We would say second. So do you see how the naming convention works there? So it's cat, lowercase, uppercase L, legs, uppercase S, seconds, or second. Make sense? So we follow this convention of camel casing. Different programming languages have different variable naming conventions. For example, Python sometimes you use camel casing, or you use underscore in between the words, like that. But yeah, for now we'll just use camel casing with this sort of thing, and as you program more, you'll get a rough understanding of what to use and what not to use. Okay, so that's cool and all, but let's actually use this in some sort of principle. And also, one thing to note is that you do come across something called commenting, and that's when you use // and then you write some sort of comment, like and that usually helps tell you what the code below does. It's quite common in sort of things to comment your code. So for example, if your code is so easy to read that you don't require comments, you don't necessarily have to do it, but it's quite common practice to comment what you've written so it makes sense. So when you get into more complex code, it makes sense to try and comment the code that you've got below. Yeah, so let's say, for example, now okay, let's try and make this code a bit more interactive. So let's say every time the draw function runs, we will increment size by a certain amount. So we could say size here equals size plus 1. So let's try looking at how that works. So what you should see is the circle slowly grows. Okay, cool. Why is that happening? So what we've done is we've set size as a variable. We've then initialized that at 100 units, and then every time the draw function runs, it gets size, which is the original value of 100, and then pluses 1 to it. So then you get 101. So every time the frame renders, it gets that value of 100 and then pluses 1 to it. So that becomes 101. The next rendered frame then gets 101, which is this, plus 1, so 102, and that's set to there. Then you get 103, and so on and so forth. And then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Like that. Cool, right? So you can do that with the... You can add other parameters here. So let's say let's say pos. So our x position, let's define that as 0. Let's say let pos y 0. Now bear in mind here that we don't necessarily have to define our size in the setup function. We can get rid of that. We can put that here. And then we can implement pos x, pos y, and then we can increment the same way we've done with pos x. The same way we've done with size, we can do the same thing with pos x. And now look, as it travels down the screen, the circle gets bigger and bigger. Cool, right? We can also add some more functions. So in the previous video, we talked about the functions that we can use to work with mouse events. So say mouse press, and then we can say here, we can say pos x equals 0, and then pos y equals 0, size equals 0.2. But you see how simple stuff we built up from simple stuff that we had going on from those episodes can lead to quite interesting and complex behavior. And you get this kind of cool sort of thing. So yeah, I'll put this in the description. Do have a play around with it. It's fairly simple. It's just 3 local variables being rendered on this canvas, or being rendered on this background, and every time you click, it draws it again. It's pretty cool. Alright, well that covers everything for today. All about variables, and I think we covered a little bit on commenting and stuff like that. So for example, a reasonable comment here would be something like mouse press. Remember, this is comments for you, so you could say something like press resets location of circle. Location size of circle. See? Fairly simple comment, makes sense to anyone reading it, defines everything. Anyway, that covers everything for today. I think, yeah, alright then. Bye bye.